All right, guys, so this is a preview of how to do Unit 2 Quiz 2. I'm going to go through some questions, so if you already know the question, just feel free to fast forward to the question that you don't understand. And I'm going to go over every single question, all right? So on question number 1, when it says what's the slope, you just have to know the slope formula, which in this case would be m is equal to y sub 2's minus y sub 1 over x sub 2's minus x sub 1, all right? So that's the formula for that. Remember, your question may not be exactly like this, all right? So not all the questions are going to be exactly what you have, but the problems are the same. They just may have different numbers, if you will. So, and this one in particular, right, I'm going to call this x1, y1. I'm going to call this x2, y2. All right, so now I'm going to have a negative 2 minus a negative 3, which becomes a positive 3. And then we have 8 minus 4, right? So in this case, you can write that as 1 over 4. So on your answer, you can actually type it in as 1 divided by 4. You could also type in 0.25, but you can just leave it as a fraction. And honestly, I think it would be easier if you did. All right, on number 2, it's asking you for what is the y-intercept. So I think this is the most commonly missed part on this quiz. So to figure out the y-intercept on this or any other type of function, remember, you just have to plug in 0 for x. Now, the reason is, if you remember me talking to you about that, is that any value that would be a y-intercept, every x value on this point would be 0, comma, for example, like 5, 0, comma, 4. Right, so notice that every time the x value is 0 when you're looking for the y-intercept. And that's how all these y-intercept problems work. Okay, so in this one, if I plug in a 0 for x, I would end up with 10 times 0 plus 7y is equal to 5. 10 times 0 is obviously 0, so I would end up with 7y is equal to 5. So y would be equal to 5 over 7. Of course, you can always solve for y on this one to figure out that y is equal to mx plus b, to write it in this form, if you will. But the more generic way of doing this one works every time if you're looking for the y-intercept, excuse me. So the way they wanted you to write this is they wanted you to write this as 0, comma, 5 over 7, like that. All right, on to number 3. It says, which of the following points lie on the line whose equation is this? So notice that they give you an equation, and it just wants to know which one of these points that you see here will be located inside the function itself. So quite honestly, the easiest, fastest thing you could do is you could probably... I would probably start off with subtracting 4 from each side like that. So I would end up with 3/5 x minus 2 minus 4. Now, of course, I can distribute that 3/5 and I can do all that and then add fractions. But since we don't have a calculator, we want to leave this in a way that we can do the math relatively quickly. All right, so all of this, the fastest way to do this is to basically plug in an x value. And by the time you plug in the x value, your result should be the y value that's right beside it. So for example, if I pick 12 to be the answer, right, I end up with, let's see, 3/5. Let's see, 12 minus 2 minus 4. Now I'm going to do the inside of the parentheses first. So this would be 3/5. See, 12 minus 2 is 10 minus 4. Now 10 times 3/5 would be the same thing as 30. Would be the same thing as 30 divided by 5, or you can also do it like this. I could divide those two, so I end up with 6. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 minus 4, and that's 2, which is not, it's not that number, so the answer cannot be this one, okay? So that's basically what you do until you find the one with the right answer. So let me quickly look at this, see if I can figure out, just do some of this in my head. Let's see, if I plug in a 7, that's going to give me a 7 minus, okay, that's a 5, that's a 3. Yeah, I think that next one is going to work out. So if I go on to the next one, I would have a 3/5, and notice that now I'm going to plug in the 7. So we have 7 minus 2, which is 5. Then I have a minus 4 there. Remember that you can always multiply 5 and 3 together, which gives you 15. Okay, you just multiply that number times the top of that fraction and then divide by 5. Or you can also reduce across like that. Okay, so 5 divided by 5 is 1. So now what I would have is y is equal to 3 minus 4, which is equal to -1, which is this y value. So the answer must be this one for this particular example. All right. Moving on to question number 4. Let's see, linear function can be written for, okay. So they're just looking for the y-intercept again. All right, remember this represents the y-intercept in any function. So you can do it however you want to. The parentheses really don't do anything. You could also, if you wanted to, since I know this is the y-intercept, plug in a 0 for x, just like we did before. But let's just go ahead and just solve for y, right? So first things first, the parentheses on the left is not really doing anything. I'm going to distribute this 5 to both of these. So I end up with 5x minus 25. And then now I'm going to add 12 to each side. So I end up with y is equal to 5x. Let's see, 25 minus 12 would be 13. So this would be a -13. All right, so the value of b would be -13. All right. Yeah. So again, you could also do that by plugging in 0 for x, and that would have worked out pretty much the same. All right. On question number 5, they're just asking you for the equation of this line. Remember, they want it in this form: y is equal to mx plus b, where m is the slope of the line and b is the y-intercept. Now this one right here would be a -5. So I'm going to end up with a -5 here for the y-intercept. And the slope, if you look at it, would be 1, 2, 3 over 1. So I went up 3 to the right 1. So the slope would be 3x. Excuse me, the slope would be 3 and the y-intercept would be -5. So I would plug in a 3 here in my computer. And right here, notice you have a plus here. And that's okay. We can just write this as a -5 right there. And that would be the end of that question. All right, question number 6. Let's see, this is the one you had to... Yeah, I actually graded this one. And I was honestly kind of surprised so many people missed it, all right? Now, and this is why I know that some of you did not study for this, because this one's relatively simple. Now, the first thing you have to do is that it is telling you that you want to write the equation of a line, right, which is here. And that line needs to go through this point right here. And then it needs to be perpendicular to this. So first thing I need to do is solve for y. Okay, so I would then solve for y here. So this would be my work on paper, okay? I would start off by subtracting 6x from both sides. And then I would divide by 18. And that would give me a -1/3 x plus 11 over 18, whatever that is. But at the end of the day, let me make sure I did everything right. Subtracted the 6x, yeah. So if this is, I want a line that's perpendicular to this one, I'm going to do the negative reciprocal of that slope. Remember, the slope is it's -1/3. So the negative reciprocal of that would be +3, okay? And so essentially now you can use this other formula. And in this class, right, though I think this is easy, but if you didn't know either that the perpendicular line is a negative reciprocal and or you didn't know the point slope formula, which is what I'm writing right here, then you honestly didn't have a chance. So when you study, you really need to go through some prompts and actually do them instead of just looking through your notes and homework. This is not a history class. This is not how you learn math. You learn math by doing. But enough about that. Y1 would be represented. This would be x1. This would be y1. All right, so y1 would be a -2, which would make this a +2. The slope, as you can see here, is 3. And then you would have an x minus 4. And then by the time you solve it, or excuse me, you need to distribute all this. I'm gonna write right here. You would distribute that 3, so you end up with a 3x minus 12. And then you would subtract 2 from both sides, so you end up with a 3x minus 14, all right? So quite honestly, in terms of the work, there's a lot of people that are still trying to write me things. Don't write sentences here. I don't want to know, okay? But what you would want to do here is say, at least tell me like, you know, slope would be 3, or excuse me. By the way, if you just got the slope, which I think is this part right here, that you would have got plenty of points here. If you would write me the work, you could write me part of everything I wrote here. You can write, you know, y is equal to negative 1/3 x plus 11 over 18. Okay, you could have written that. And you could have said the perpendicular slope would be m is equal to 3. And then you could have written essentially what I wrote here. So I'm trying to show you how you would write this specifically when it comes to your college test coming up soon, right? And at the end, you can just write me the final answer, but also answer what it said, right? So the value of B, this would be part A. The value of B would be B is equal to negative 14, all right? So I needed to see some of that stuff, okay? You don't need to write more than what I wrote there, all right? Moving on to question number 7. On this one, I would say probably one of the easiest way you can do this is to solve for y. This is not the only way, so I would start off by subtracting 3 from both sides. Then I would divide both sides by 4. If I divide this by 4, also divide this by 4. So you probably would see it like this on a, or you might have done it like this and got lost. If you divide that by 4, that's the same thing as dividing this by 4 and dividing the 24 by 4. So in the end, you end up with negative 3/4 x plus 4. Okay, so notice that the y-intercept is 4. So, wait a second. I don't have a 4. Did I miss? Oh, yeah. I divided here by 6 like an idiot. So this is 6. My bad. So this is 6. So notice that I can eliminate all the ones that are that don't have a y-intercept of 6. Like that one. And this one. And okay, I have a slope of, it's a negative slope first of all, so this is out. And this is out because that's a positive slope. This is a positive slope, so it's got to be this one. So let's just check. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 over 4. Yep. 1, 2, 3 over 4. Yep. So as you can see, that's a slope of negative 3/4. All right. So we're done with that one. Moving on. I don't really know how many people got messed up at this one, but notice that it talks about a natural spring that has a total volume of 8 billion ounces of water. And I think what was confusing is that they give you this in billions, and humans consume 13 million ounces. All right, so what you have to know is that 8 billion is 8,000 million. So you're gonna have to convert that. All right, so if we start with 8 billion, I mean, I think the answer is gonna be that one. Yes, it is gonna be that one. Wait a second. No, it's not. Let's see. We started with 8,000, so I know it can't be that one, or this one. So let's leave between those two. Yeah, it's this one. My bad. All right, and the reason is because you started with 8,000 million ounces of water, and every year, you're subtracting, that's the slope, right? You're subtracting 13 from it every time. So if you don't know what we're saying, right? If you have 8,000 on the first year, you're gonna lose 13. On the second year, you're gonna lose 26, but I could write that 26 as 13 times 2, right? I can write this as 13 times 1. After 3 years, you will be consuming 39, but I can write 39 as 39 times 3, excuse me. And then you would hopefully notice that the only thing changing here would be the x, or like this number right here, which I can express as a variable, if you will, which in this case they call it t. All right, so that's the idea behind it. All right, question number 9, a linear model. What is not a good fit, okay? So when is a linear model not a good fit? Well, let's see. When there's not a constant rate of change. You have to have a constant rate of change, which, by the way, a constant rate of change is talking about the slope of the line. So you have to have some slope, some constant, as in a line, rate of change, okay? Y-intercept. Well, just like I said earlier, right? To find the y-intercept, you're going to plug in a 0 for x, and then solve for y. So we're going to plug in a 0 for x. So we end up with the absolute value of 6 times 0 minus 5. Close the absolute value, minus 4. So 6 times 0 is 0. The absolute value of negative 5 minus 4. The absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. So I have 5 minus 4 in the end, which is 1. Okay, so my answer right here, you want to write your y-intercept as 0, comma 1. Okay, so that would be the answer here. Let me make double sure here. Yep, that would be it. Yes, all right. Okay, and this one is just asking you what is the transformation here, and if you can tell right here, I went to the left one, up 3, right? Which, so we talked about this quite a bit in 251. At the time, we hadn't done it extensively, but that's how that works. So I end up with an x plus 1. Remember, that is going to be the opposite of if I move to the left, I'm actually going to write a plus, and I'm actually going to write a plus 3 here. Now, I know this is not being stretched because of the slope of this line for this particular example, right? The slope is just 1, so the answer would just be what you see there. So in this case, A would be 1, right, because it's not being stretched. H, notice they already have a negative. So yeah, I would put a negative here. And again, it's negative. I know you're saying, well, I thought you said it was positive. It is. But the way they write it is they wrote it like this. You have to fit it into this formula that you see above, okay? So I would write this as negative 1. And then the k would be 3. So this right here on the inside would be h. This right here would be k. And this is a. And so, let's see. So k is 3. All right, question number 12. Oh, okay. This is normally a drop-down menu, all right? So on the drop-down menu, I don't exactly know how that would look to you, but this would be 13 and negative 13, all right? So when you're solving for an absolute value function, you have to set one function that's exactly the same equal to 13 and the other function equal to negative 13. And then honestly, at that point, you just solve. So you end up with like 2x plus 5 is equal to 13. So 2x is equal to 8. So I'm subtracting 5 from each side. So x is equal to 4. So this would be 4 here. And if I do the same thing except with negative 13, I would end up with 2x. If I subtract 5 from each side, I end up with a negative 18. So x would be negative 9. So I don't know if that's the exact order what that would look like, but those 4 answers are all true right there. What are the solutions? So remember, to solve an absolute value equation, the first thing I want to do is I want to isolate the absolute value. Now, sometimes you can distribute, but please do not distribute until you separate into 2 different cases. Now, I'm going to decide to divide here because I realize that if I divide, this is not going to have a fraction. 60 divided by 12 is 5, okay? So what I'm trying to tell you, right, from earlier, if you don't understand me, is that you do not distribute until you make 2 cases, right? So don't distribute until you decide that you're going to make 2 cases. Oh, goodness. I don't know why that happened. My bad. So that would leave you with those 2. Okay, and then you would just solve for D. So let's see, add a 5, that's a 12, so D is equal to 6. And let's see, add the 7, so that would give me a 2. So D is equal to 1 on this one, so 6 and 1. So what I was trying to tell you is that you can do 2 cases, but you have to wait until you could then distribute this. You have to make 2 cases if you wanted to distribute that 12. But I think in general, it is better to try to isolate the absolute value first. You could have distributed then, but do not distribute before then. That could lead to many painful mistakes later on in the course. All right, this next one is something that I kind of talked to some of you about, and if you have a problem like number 14, all right, again, I want to isolate the absolute value, so I'm going to subtract 14. So I end up with 3 absolute value of 2x minus 7 is equal to negative 12, it looks like. Yep. And I'm going to isolate this. So I'm going to divide both sides by a 3. So I end up with negative 4. Now, here's the deal. As soon as I see that, I know that the answer is no solution. You may not know that, but what I do know is that whatever number I happen to pick here, it doesn't matter what the number is, the answer for this entire thing would be a positive because I would take the absolute value of that at the end. So an absolute value cannot ever give me a negative answer. Like it won't not give me a negative answer right there. So I already know the answer is no solution, but if in doubt, you could just write 2 cases, right? If you weren't sure. You could write 2 cases. You could solve for x. Let's see, that gives me a 3 here. So x is equal to 3 halves. And on this side, that would give me 11. So x is equal to 11 over 2. So when you do that, and you plug it in, and I'm going to plug it into here so you can see what I'm talking about, right? So I'm going to plug that back in here. So I end up with a 2 times 3 halves minus 7 absolute value. That equal to negative 4? So that would be that. I end up with 3 minus 7, excuse me. Is that equal to negative 4? So the absolute value of negative 4, and this is what I'm talking about. This absolute value of negative 4 is going to turn this into a positive 4, which cannot be equal to a negative 4. So this is why the solutions are not valid. All right, same thing happens with 11 over 2. So that's what the answer is, no solution on that one. All right. By the way, if it's just a true and it's asking you if this is true or false, right? Oh, I mean, you could solve for it if you want to and then figure that out. Or what you could do is just plug in the negative 5, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to plug in a negative 5 for this letter Z. Let's see here. Absolute value of negative 8. Absolute value of negative 8. Which is negative 16, all right? So then the question, really all you have to answer then is negative 16 less than negative 20. All right, so it's negative 16 less than negative 20. And no, negative 16 is actually more. Okay, so this answer is false. So negative 16 is not less than negative 20. It's actually greater than negative 20. So moving on. On question 16, you're going to solve again. Remember, when you're solving with an inequality, you're going to start off by dividing by 9. Well, please notice that this would have a solution because by the time I isolate the absolute value, I would end up with, by the way, don't forget to switch the inequality here because I divided by a negative. I would end up with a 4, a positive 4. So this will have an answer, right? And then now from what we talked about previously, you're going to make 2 cases. One of them that's exactly the same. And then the other one that would be almost the same, except for now this is going to be greater than or equal to, and it's going to be greater than or equal to -4. And then you solve for each case. So it would end up with m is less than or equal to 2, and this would be m is greater than or equal to -6. Okay, so now they were actually trying to do you a favor here. If they write it like that, they're telling you that the answers are in between. All right, like I talked about in the past. That looks like a terrible arrow here, but this is a -6 here. This would be a +2. Okay, so those are both equal to. Now notice that this says m is less than 2, less than or equal to 2 would be shading everything that way. This one right here would be m is greater than or equal to -6, so I would shade everything that way. So where the overlapping shade happens would be right there, right? So right there in the area would be your solutions. So yes, if you're gonna write the answer like that, which is the way that you would write it in between, you always write the smaller number, you write the smaller number first always, all right, and the bigger one second. So you might have got the right answer and you just got those numbers backwards. I don't know. And finally, on question 17, it's asking you for the expression of the graph. Notice that I went to, I'll talk about the inequality here in a second. Let's see, I know this is an absolute value because that's what it looks like. I moved 1 to the left, which is going to be x plus 1, and then I moved up 4, right? So I know this is the equation for sure. Is this being stretched? We'll talk about that here in just a second, but what I do know is that it's shaded underneath. So if it's shaded underneath, that's going to be y is less than, all right? So let's look for all the y is less than. Let's see, so those two. So now my only job is to figure out, well, never mind. It should be this one, but let's make double sure here. It says that it's been vertically compressed by 2/3. And an absolute value, you can actually figure that out pretty quickly because this is easier than what we've done in 251 because it's just a line. So if I go up 2/3, okay, so yeah, that should be the answer, okay? So the answer would have a 2/3 vertical compression. All right, well, I hope this helped. Remember, if you want to do, for me, a retake, you're going to have to do it before or after school or whenever I happen to be in the room. And I would say you need at least half an hour or so. Just try to figure out a way to do that, right? I'm not going to take time in class to do it, but